Hey, this is Liberty DeVito, and you're listening to the Fab Four Free For All.
Welcome to another edition of the Fab Four Free For All, which is a Beatles podcast / talk show about the Beatles. Besides being a podcast, it is also on YouTube, so you get to see our lovely faces if you want to. I am your moderator for this week, Rob Leonard, and joining me, of course, are my friends and co-host Mitch Axelrod.
Hey, folks.
And Tony Traguardo.
Hi, everybody.
And today our topic is something you don't think about with the Beatles or the solo Beatles, and that's comebacks. Each Beatle, as a solo artist, has at one point or another had a comeback, which you don't think about because you always think about the Beatles and they're always in the news seemingly or whatever. But as solo artists, and even the Beatles themselves, and I'll get to that later, have had comebacks where they sort of disappeared for a while, whether it was their choice or not, and then they come back.
Right.
So
right.
It's not something you normally think about, but we're going to do that show today. So.
Rob, I know you saying that there needs to be some distance to call it a comeback, but
yeah,
I think in a couple of mine I'll show you that maybe there doesn't have to be as much distance. That I picked events that helped them come back in the public eye. So,
okay, that's good.
But I just wanted to clarify.
Okay, I'm going to start off with George Harrison.
Okay.
George Harrison, first of all, we have to say the 80s were not a good decade for the Beatles for the most part. Obviously, John Lennon gets murdered. Paul does not a really good movie. He Pipes a Peace was not a good album per se.
But he started the decade with Tug of War, though.
Yes, that's true. And George had a couple of albums. One was a hit, actually, somewhere in England, but it wasn't a big selling album, but it was a hit per se. And then Ringo kind of disappeared with 2 records. But my comeback for George Harrison is in 1987, where he does Cloud 9, where he specifically knows he's been away for 5 years, basically. He did the Carl Perkins special, which was a great comeback for George.
So you just took about where I was going to go, but go ahead.
That's all right. You can still do it later.
No, it's okay. It's okay.
And the one thing about the Carl Perkins special that I think is important to remember is what Olivia said about George in the press. She was interviewed about because she was there, obviously. And she said she never saw him smile as much as he did that day. And if you look at him, he's just incredibly happy.
Yeah, he's beaming the whole time.
Yeah. But it was also there where he meets Dave Edmunds, and he said to Dave Edmunds, "Hey, I'd like to have Jeff Lynne, co-produce my next record." Not Dave Edmunds, who's well-known producer also.
But Dave Edmunds had Jeff Lynne produce a few.
Right. That's a good point.
So that's,
"Slipping Away" is a great song from
absolutely
Dave and produced by Jeff.
Yeah.
So George going into Cloud 9 knows it's been 5 years, and he's going to give the press push that he did not really do for the first 2 albums of the 80s.
We should probably kind of note, though, Rob, that it's when we talk about comebacks, there are like 2-3 different ideas, and you mentioned earlier self-imposed, disappearing, or and I think in the case of George, we talked about Somewhere in England as having been the hit, but we left out Gone Troppo. That was
right.
It was not just not a hit, but George did no publicity for the album.
Right.
None. It was the last album for the Warner Brothers contract. Warner Brothers didn't seem to want to put a lot of effort behind it, and George didn't either. So
I'm not sure if it was the last album, but I do know he did know, because the next Cloud 9 was on Warner Brothers too. So unless he re-signed with them, I wasn't sure. Yeah,
I don't know. I thought that was the last Warner Brothers records, or that was the last. I could be wrong, but like I said, I think that was one of the reasons why George just elected to not do any publicity for it.
Well,
So,
it was in the title, Gone Troppo, you know?
yeah,
Right.
screw it. I'm off.
Right.
I'm off to the islands to go. I'm off to the islands. I don't need this crap anymore.
He was just, he was fed up with, especially after Somewhere in England, where he specifically, says he hates the industry. He was fed up. He didn't, and he knew he wouldn't be played on the radio, which is a shame because, Dream Away was a great song. And Gone Troppo, as you both know, is probably one of my favorites. So I'll defend it to the hilt. But
Absolutely. I love that.
I totally agree that, he didn't do anything for it. And because of that, it was almost like a self-imposed after that.
And I just checked, and it was indeed his last album for that Warner Brothers contract.
Okay.
So
we should say also that Somewhere in England, they came to him and said, "Hey, George, change some of these songs." Blood from a Clone is George's answer, which is a great answer. It mentions Frank Zappa and the bad record.
He was fed up with the
but look at the great songs some of the great songs you lost by Warner Brothers being putzes like that.
Yeah, that's true. That's very true.
Which still sit, no pun intended, sat singing. Which is one of my favorites. But that's still languishing somewhere. But anyway, go ahead, Tom.
Yeah. So
no, I don't know. I mean, like you said, Rob. I mean, it's a cross. I think between like Troppo as a comeback and not Troppo. I'm sorry, Cloud 9 as a comeback. But I always think of the Carl Perkins special as being just like George's, just coming out of the woodwork again. And you could even, if one wants to, you can even look at George Harrison as being something of a comeback because. Here's George Harrison. Not George Harrison. I'm so sorry. 33 1/3, rather.
Right.
You can look at 33 1/3 as being something of a comeback because, he had done that one record that was, Dark Horse, where it was just such a difficult record, with his voice being the way it was and the songs being kind of, I don't know, dark and slow, and then you got to that like L.A. Whatever of Extra Texture, which also got hit hard by the critics and stuff like that. And then finally, it was a dirge, man. It's just
it's hard to listen to. There's some good stuff, but overall.
And then comes 33 1/3, which is like really great songwriting, a combination of that really smooth LA feel, but a little more true to George Harrison, I think. Than the previous two had really been. And I think he put his heart into 33 1/3, and you got the two singles.
Yeah, but also it happened pretty quick, though. It happened pretty quick after Extra Texture. So it is part of a comeback because it's much better musically than, let's say, Extra Texture. But it was a pretty quick.
But it was three. But you got to remember, in between, you had the bummer of an album that was Dark Horse.
Right.
You had
74
the beatdown of the poor guy after the 74 tour.
That's true.
The last really big record of George's that anybody really had risen up and take notice of was 3 years earlier with Give Me Love, Give Me Peace on Earth.
Yeah.
So you had 3 years of kind of whoa, from George, and then
but he was putting out material, so he wasn't like
putting out material. Yeah, but again, that's why I'm saying a comeback. I don't think is always literally just coming back out of the woods to go make a record. I think it's.
I agree.
It's that idea of being back in the public eye and being back in the public's graces again,
and also wanting to be there too. I think that's part of it. Because
very well put.
That was the difference, I think, with Cloud 9, because Cloud 9, he did a lot of press for that. Warner Brothers was so happy with it, and George was so happy. They made 2 videos for Got My Mind Set on You. Yeah. I mean, that's incredible. Back then they really didn't do that.
Right.
And it was George Harrison. Usually you do that if it's a dance video or something. And this was, he was dancing in his chair. But
you can think about the fun that he had with that, because we're talking about the Carl Perkins special and how Olivia said he was smiling so much, but about the records that came before, it was still George working with a lot of great session people.
Right.
But session people. Now
Right.
you move on to Cloud 9, and it's George working with a lot of his friends.
Yeah, that was the difference, I think.
A whole different ball game.
And also just the way George approached it with Jeff, I think there was just a confidence of working with someone who was not just a producer, but had his own hits of his and had his own sound.
Yeah.
As a producer, and I know a lot of people like to knock Jeff Lynne's sound with George Harrison. I wasn't bothered by it. A couple of songs had it, but it wasn't like it was an ELO record.
No.
And there are some people out there who will say, well, the drumming on that, listen to the drumming. And I'm like, okay, what's wrong with it? Okay, there's electric drum track on Got My Mind Set on You. Jim Keltner programmed it. But I thought that was like his comeback. And if you think about Cloud 9, it is his last solo album as a solo artist while he was alive. Hard to believe.
I want to touch on a couple of things, if you don't mind. Something Tony said, the 85 Carl Perkins special.
Right.
I think that was big. Obviously, you mentioned why it was big, and I totally agree. And it's a gorgeous thing to watch. I mean, it's just I still get chills watching it.
Yeah.
But I think that also led to so much confidence in George. I don't think he would have done the Princess Trust in '87 had he not been on stage with Carl Perkins. I mean, he did 2 songs. I know he was with Ringo and a bunch of his friends, but still, I mean, he never liked to get on stage. I mean, he would get on stage with Deep Purple and, and do an occasional song like that, but, in a club. But we're talking, Royal Albert Hall now, again, in front of, the Prince and all that, whatever they were, the Queen or whatever, whoever they were.
Princess Diana.
Yeah.
Whoever they were. Yeah, whatever it is.
Well, but
they're not Americans. Who cares? We don't know.
Exactly. No, sorry, all you British listeners. No, but I mean, I think that gave him the confidence to get back up there and really do it, which is great because the Princess Trust is really good. I enjoyed that as well. But I think Tony also the 33 and the third and George Harrison, he called them sort of like the Rubber Soul and Revolver, like, A and B, whatever, the double.
Yeah.
I think those are tremendous because, as you said, they didn't really take that much time in between the bummer of Extra Texture, but he was thrust back in, like you said, Rob. He made videos. He was thrust back into the limelight. He did SNL. I mean, George did SNL in '76. Yeah, for 33.
Oh, okay. I'm thinking Cloud 9. I apologize.
Yeah. So, I mean, for him to do that too, I mean, he's George Harrison. He just doesn't like to do it. And if you and during that time, that's also the time we get that video of him watching This Boy, and he embraces the Beatles again, at that time. And I think that also was a big comeback. But to your point, Rob, and this is the main one I had. I not only had Cloud 9, but I had just meeting Jeff Lynne in general, because not only does he do Cloud 9, but that also takes them to the Wilburys. And the Wilburys, I think, made George cool again. He embraced his time. I mean, Cloud 9, he obviously embraced Beatlemania again to do the video When We Was Fab and stuff. And he talked about the Beatles a lot in '86 and '87, which he never did in the prior. He didn't want.
Right. No, you good point.
But I think the Wilburys thing, everybody bought the Wilburys even more. I mean, Cloud 9 went platinum, 1 million in the States, but and it went well all over the world. But the Wilburys just blew out. I mean, it went triple platinum and got him and all the other guys new fans, and everybody knew who George Harrison was because. Right. All the Wilburys even said was that, that it was George's band.
They always said that. They always said that. George would say the opposite. He would say it was Bob Dylan's band. But I think meeting Jeff, doing Cloud 9. I mean, obviously Brainwash came out of it too later, but I think the Wilburys thing. But I think, he had a couple of comebacks, George Harrison, and it was good to see because. I think,
we could have also said, I mean, obviously he didn't, he died 9 years later, but I would have said the concert in Royal Albert Hall in '92, April of '92.
Right.
And that's a good point too.
Well, then again, I've heard that from some record people I know that if George Harrison had toured, let's say 1988, based on Cloud 9, that album would have probably sold another 1 million copies.
Easy.
Oh, easy.
And think about
absolutely.
think about the Live in Japan album, which is 3 years later, where he needs money. He finds out that Dennis O'Brien maybe put up money that he shouldn't have put up, and George owed it because it was his company. I often wondered if he had gone out in '88 as a touring thing, would have that helped sell that album? But then again, maybe you don't get the Traveling Wilburys then because he had time.
That's true too.
Yeah, I don't know which one I'd pick, the Traveling Wilburys or a tour. I'd probably pick the Traveling Wilburys.
Well, yeah, because he toured 3 years later, so
right,
it didn't matter.
Full tour of Japan, very small.
Yeah, I was going to say toured.
Toured.
Did some shows in a small country, but
think about this, guys. How many shows did he do in Japan? 10, 11?
Something like that. Very short amount.
Okay, yeah, all right, but 10, 11. Paul McCartney just toured as of the recording of this show, doing the Got Back tour. He only did 13 shows.
Right, but that's different now. He purposely. He hasn't done a real tour.
No. But what I'm saying is, it's still called a tour, and it's still 11 versus 13, so it's still a tour.
Okay.
Sure. But I'm just saying, I'm going by the idea of demand and exposure. I mean, Paul's been continually exposed doing live shows for a really long time. Well, for George, it's just that idea that he did a tour. He had 11 shows. Like we wish there had been 75 shows.
And there may have been, but
who knows?
And that would have probably would have done the state. That would have been the comeback.
That's true. Just Mitch, let's get back to what you said about Paul touring. I purposely think, since he just did Glastonbury, and that was that's a big deal, especially in England, that this Got Back thing was sort of a setup just to get his voice back into shape for Glastonbury. I think because he cares about that stuff. And I heard some clips from the show, and I thought his voice sounded a lot better than the beginning of the Got Back tour.
Well, next time we do a show on comebacks for his voice, we can talk about the
tour. So George Harrison, and we should say that during this period that George wasn't making music, or we should say releasing music, because he claims he made a lot of music in his house. Friends would come over, they'd start recording.
Yeah, well, where is it?
Well,
let's get it then.
I hopefully that's another album. But he was also executive producer for a lot of movies.
Yes, and that was I mean.
One could argue behind the scenes where you wouldn't say that's a comeback.
But I was going to say, it's funny, I mean, there's two things we're not thinking too. I mean, when it comes to an artistic comeback, is it the idea that the four Beatles are all artists in different ways, and that George is one of the ones that had a lucrative and very powerful second career. For George was a comeback for him. Making the first film that he did with Bob Hoskins. I mean, was there an essence to him that where being an artist making a comeback meant producing a really nice piece of art?
Right. What if he never made another album and just produced billion dollar movies the rest of his life?
Yeah,
we'd have to say, that's a comeback.
That's his comeback.
It's not the way we probably would have wanted it. But it's still an artistic comeback.
And there's also the idea too that as much as it's kind of like weird to think of it as such, is All Things Must Pass a comeback? Is it a
no? It's a declaration.
It's a declaration, right? It's a coming out.
Point, Rob.
Beautifully put. Yeah.
Yeah, that was.
Yeah,
it's planting the flag on the moon and saying, "Hey, you bastards!
Yep.
Look what I had waiting in the can." You know.
If only you'd paid attention. Right, there you go.
Okay, so we got through one Beatle. Let's get to a second Beatle, and that would be Ringo Starr. Ringo's had an interesting comeback, and I'll start his comeback in 1989 with the first All-Star Band tour. He had really spent a lot of the 80s drunk. or at least in the press, saying that he was drunk.
No, he was. You could tell in a lot of those interviews, Rob. The one he did, I forgot which one he does.
Well, John Davidson's the one I know of.
Yes, but there's also the UK one he does with George,
right?
Where he talks about "I'll still love you," and he's totally allegedly, but he looks just. I mean, not looks. He sounds just drunk.
Yeah, he's slurred.
He's lit. He's lit.
Yeah. But 1989, he had just almost did a complete album with Chips Moman, who had produced Elvis Presley's comeback in '69. The Memphis sessions, and Ringo said, let's try again with Chips. And it didn't happen. Matter of fact, Ringo had to sue Chips when Chips tried to put out the record during the All-Star Band tour of '89. And Ringo did win. But I really liked his version of I Can Help, which has been floating around for years.
Yeah.
It was a nice choice. And Elvis did that song too. So
also everybody thought when he had the hit, when Billy Paul had the hit with that, Billy Swan. I'm sorry, not me and Mrs. Jones. When Billy Swan had the hit with "I Can Help," how many people thought it was Ringo to begin with?
Oh yes, especially during that time when Ringo was on the charts.
Yeah, Ringo did that, and
wasn't it like '74?
And John and Bob Dylan had just had what do you call Stuck in the Middle with You? But anyway, that great one. Anyway,
by the way, I was just reading just off topic for a second. I was just reading Pete Hamill's interview with John Lennon from 1975, June of '75, in Rolling Stone magazine. When John has not announced yet that he is walking away from the business, and they asked him, "Could you produce Elvis or Dylan?"
And he said, "Wait, I've got him right here." No, I'm sorry.
And he said,
"Sorry, bad joke."
He said he would be scared to do Elvis, but if he did do Elvis, it would be an all rock and roll album. And he said about Dylan, he goes, I wouldn't have to worry about the songs. I would need to worry about the backing tracks. I still don't like the backing tracks of Blood on the Tracks.
Wow.
So,
wow.
You know, so it's kind of, he goes, Dylan would be easy to work with. Elvis would be a little harder. So
instead, he chose to give stuff to Ringo. No.
Yeah.
Right.
So Ringo in 1989, David Fishoff approaches him and says, you should do a tour. And we're going to get an all-star band, a lot of friends. Some of them some of you might not know, but you're going to know them by the end of the tour. And there were a lot of people on stage, and sometimes it didn't sound clean as it should be, but it was still a great show. And it was, to me, Ringo's comeback as a performer per se, because he basically tours every 2 years now. It's part of his his what he does now. When he says, when people say, "Oh, you got to retire," he goes, "No, this is what I do." So to me, that's where it starts for Ringo, because the '80s were kind of a lost weekend in many ways, except he was married and with Barbara. Yeah. So
sorry, go ahead.
No, I was going to say, it's funny, for me, it's like I always love the all-star band shows, and obviously there's a huge degree of a comeback there, but I think about sort of the comeback that never was. I like for Ringo, I think about what would have happened had there been a full-on Ringo and the Roundheads tour. I mean, I saw Ringo and the Roundheads at Bottom Line. And Ringo was in just absolutely incredible spirits, and he was doing his original music, a lot more of his original music, with a band that wasn't all-stars. These were the session guys that had been on his record, and he did, and it was really Ringo-centric. And as much as I love the all-star band shows, and as much fun as they are, which they really are, and comeback also meaning that it got Ringo into you say the word Ringo around people, around any of the millions of people who've been to one of the all-star shows, and Ringo, there's that wonderful smile of yeah, we love Ringo, Ringo was back. But when it came to the Roundheads idea of Ringo going out and doing Ringo songs,
right,
for an hour and 15 minutes, maybe double billed with somebody, that was sort of a comeback that never was, because had that tour happened and he sold out, even if it was smaller venues, but You know what? Ringo and the Roundheads would have sold out here on Long Island. We have what was Westbury Music Fair. However many couple thousand seats there. He would have sold out venues like that. Being
He
Ringo,
easily would have. He's still Ringo.
He would have. So I mean, he sold it out. He's already played there, so it's not like he never played there.
No, but where I'm going is, had he gone into a Westbury Music Fair, maybe on a double bill, and did an hour and 15 minutes of the Ringo and the Roundheads set. Not having Todd Rundgren songs to support him and Burton Cummings songs to support him, and just being Ringo for an hour and 15 minutes. I think he still would have been, lauded. I think.
That's like an alternate universe for Ringo, if you think about it, because every new record from Vertical Man on, the Roundheads basically would do some appearances. And then the All-Star Band would be, okay, we're going to have the All-Star Band tour now.
Yeah, off I go, and I'm on the road with the,
Yeah, so
with all those important people.
Yeah,
you all stay here. Yeah.
It's interesting that Ringo's one of the few guys who can do both, because he likes playing other people's music too. One of the things I noticed when I saw him in 2006, and I was 12th row when I was out in Palm Springs, how happy he was to be playing like on a Billy Squier song or a Sheila E. song or who was the other guitar player there? I forgot, but he was. There was a certain happiness. Richard Marx was the other guy. There's a certain happiness you can see that he likes to play with other people. It reminds me of Elton John. If you talk to Elton, he loves playing with other people. He doesn't get the chance to just sometimes be the barrel house piano player on a back, just playing the piano, not even singing or being, the main guy. He loves it. And Ringo gets that same impression, I think, I get that impression from Ringo, that he loves playing with other people as much as he likes to be the guy in the front, So,
I'm going to go, I'm totally there with you, Rob, but I'm going to go just a little bit back, which led to the All-Star. Again, an event, going into rehab for alcohol.
Right.
He and Barbara went, and he knew he needed to go. And we alluded to him being drunk in the 80s. He knew it. I think the rehab led to the All-Star Band, because he said he needed something to keep him busy.
Yes.
So he wouldn't drink. And thank God, he's been sober all this time, which is great. But I think the next couple of things for me with Ringo, and listen, the All-Star Band idea is just amazing, because everybody easily plops down their money, because you're not only seeing Ringo, but Ringo's obviously the headliner, and it's such a great concept. And I would, I think other people have done it since. I'm not saying he's a trendsetter, but there's been so many combination tours now, when people do their stuff, but not where other people do other people's stuff. So it still is unique in its own right.
Right.
So that's kind of cool. And I love seeing, different people. I know there were complaints about, having 80s and 90s rockers or whatever. And I don't want to see the new kids on the block with Ringo doing, the right stuff. I don't need to see Ringo going, but still, but he probably can do it better than them. He's in such great shape.
But Ringo can say we were the original boy band.
First kids on the block, yeah. But the other thing that I think really brought Ringo back, and by the way, the All-Star Band, Tony, when you said, it's Ringo, the All-Star Band made Ringo now into like Cher and Madonna. It's just Ringo, and you know who it is. He's that one name guy now.
Well, it's not like anybody ever went, oh, you mean Ringo Schwartz? I mean,
well, he didn't change his name to Schwartz yet, but no, but I mean, it is amazing now that he's just Ringo. It's not even Ringo Starr anymore. It's just Ringo. And it is a unique name in any case. So it's Madonna though, and Cher.
Yeah.
But the other thing is two things quickly. Time takes time.
Right.
Definitely.
Rate of
Definitely.
the World. I mean, working with Jellyfish, and also that first album, he did work with Mark Hudson on that on, I think, one track on that.
He did.
And that led to, for me, the real comeback. I mean, I know the Rehab is huge, and to me that's number one. But the second one is, I think, the release of Vertical Man.
I agree.
And working with Hudson, as much as he did like 5 albums or something, and live albums and other stuff, and it was very productive for Ringo. And even though the albums, Ringo as a whole doesn't sell, unfortunately. But the albums were really good with Hudson.
Absolutely, yeah. There's that artistic comeback idea.
Correct. Yeah. Artistically, I think Ringo then said, "Wow." I mean, I know, Liverpool 8 was the start of the end.
Yes.
And you could sort of tell. After that, the albums were a little more sporadic, but I think the Hudson years, which leads exactly to your point, Tony, with the Roundheads, because and without Vertical Man and Hudson, there's no Roundheads. He really pushed him, and the harmonies, and I mean, they really were great session players. No matter what you think of Hudson personally, or don't think of him, he really was good for Ringo. And I think he did produce some really good stuff for Ringo, and I think that led Ringo on a path to just happiness as well.
Yeah, I think so.
Ringo Rama. I mean, all of those are really fine albums.
Yeah, I agree. One thing about Vertical Man, he did a lot of press for that too.
Yes.
Unfortunately, it didn't help sell the record as much, but he was on radio shows. He was on tons of TV shows, and he was happy to say, "Hey, I'm back." The only problem he had with that record, it was supposed to be released on one label, and then the label went out of business.
Yeah.
And then it got switched over, and so it's got switched over to Mercury. So unfortunately, the planning had to be pushed back, and that might have helped or hurt actually the sales. But Ringo did a lot of, presenting of himself, which he didn't do as much along the way. And one thing that led to was there are some Ringo and the Roundhead albums out, the live albums, which I was glad that he did that, because he did put out all-star band albums, there's nothing wrong with.
Right.
But there is something different about the Roundheads.
The Storyteller album.
The Storyteller album's a fantastic one. And then there was the Soundstage one too. So
yes.
And both of them are very strong, not just Ringo, but the band was just hot as hell.
Fantastic.
One thing I can't understand for the life of me, and I'm not sure if we talked about this right in the Vertical Man show, but how does a single like La Di Da not go top 40? Because it's Ringo, it's fun. He did a great video. Paul was on it too, and I thought that was not a misstep by Ringo, just a misstep by the public, because I think it was such a good typical quote Ringo song. If you had to,
you hit the nail on the head of why it didn't chart.
Why's that?
Because you never can look at the song and the artist, and you always have to look at what else is on the charts that month. The reason why it didn't do anything is because at that time, as far as the top 40 was concerned, nobody was looking for a quote typical Ringo great pop song.
Yeah, you're right. I mean, Ringo was 57, 58 when that came out. So and rock radio didn't pick it up. I think La Di Da is one of his best songs ever. I think it has a great catchy chorus.
Absolutely.
It's the Yellow Submarine of the 90s for him.
Yeah. No, I thought, and one thing I think when he comes back with Vertical Man, that it led him, I think, the great work with Mark Hudson. But after that, when him and Mark had whatever happened to him, Ringo still produces his own now, which you might not have thought of in 1975, that Ringo would be his own producer. And mind you, they record everything one bit at a time, but that's the way it works, and it doesn't sound
no, doesn't have
in pieces. It sounds very good.
But he's got a lot of output now, which is, I think, is because he did so much in the 90s,
right,
and 2000s. Because Ringo has a big discography as a solo artist.
Now he does, yeah.
When it comes to that Mark Hudson period, the other thing that you do have going on is you had a lot of, not to be stupidly cliche, but you had a lot of, with a little help from his friend, stuff too. He'd have, Paul, and you'd get the coming of a Ringo album would show up in the press because, hey, Steven Tyler's on the new Ringo album. Hey, Tom Petty's on the new Ringo album. Hey, McCartney's on the new Ringo album. So you got a lot of comeback press for a lot of those Mark Hudson records because Ringo, it's just like with George and Cloud Nine and recording with friends and not just studio dudes.
Right.
Ringo was surrounded by people who he really liked, and I think that helped a lot.
Yeah, I just wish that there'd be some way to resell those records because you can't sell them. The only way you can really sell them is on television. The K-Tel, not like a K-Tel record, but and here's Ringo Starr's latest album, and guess who's on it? Paul McCartney and Steven Tyler and all these other people, and maybe he sells a couple of 100,000 that way.
You know what you're going to see? You're going to see one of the reissue labels talk to Ringo about adding B-sides and then putting out new colored vinyl versions.
Right.
That's the big thing now. You take a record, you put out
he has not
vinyl.
paid attention really to Record Store Day. So.
No.
And there was one with the singles photograph.
Oh, that's right.
The box set. So he had a nice box set. He had, I'd rather have that than no offense to Paul, but like the Women and Wives that just came out from McCartney 3. That's just a 12-inch of the latest stuff.
Yes.
But the box set with the the picture sleeves and everything, that was nice.
That's true. I forgot about that.
Yeah, but he hasn't done anything since. But you know what, Rob, to your point though, listen, the last album or one of the last album, not the EPs, but he made a big deal out of Grow Old With Me. Yeah. And he redid a John Lennon song and Paul McCartney's on it, and playing, and it still didn't do anything.
Yeah, but you know what?
You have to let the music speak for itself, and I think it did.
They should have walked that over to the countryside of the aisle and said, "Hey, boys and girls, this sort of sounds like a country song." And countries is so much wider in what they consider country now. Yeah. That song could have easily been brought over to the countryside. We've talked about Ringo doing a country album for a while. Yeah. That could have been released as a country song. And there was also a problem with that song. If Paul McCartney's singing on it, I should be able to hear him a little bit better.
Yeah.
That was my only problem. They mixed it too low on Paul on that. But that's a good point. About Grow Old With Me. Anyway, our next Beatle is John Lennon.
Ooh.
And there's a couple of comebacks with John, but if you think about it, he's one of the first artists of his stature to walk away for 4 years and say, you know what, I'm going to take some time off. I have a kid. I want to watch him grow up a little bit. I'm also sick and tired of the business. I'm just going to walk away and hang out with Dakota and look over on Central Park.
The only other big person that you had retire at that time, well, not retire, but walk away for 3 years was Springsteen.
And that was because he was being sued.
Because he was being sued. Yeah, but it's interesting. Springsteen disappeared. He just didn't make an announcement that he was leaving.
Yeah.
But George did it too.
Yeah.
Yeah, George never admitted that he was going away. He just
left.
He just went away.
He just left. Yeah.
But John's the first one really out of that generation to say, I'm going to, and if you think about it now, and same with George, 4 or 5 years now is the average for many artists to put out records. It shouldn't be. They should be putting out still once a year. I like that once a year thing.
I've had 25 years between my albums.
What was that, Tony?
I said I've had 25 years between my albums.
Wow. We'll have to sell it on our show.
It's tough to keep up the standards of what they expected, like the Beatles to do. 2 albums, 4 albums, 3 singles before sitting.
Right.
Come on. I mean, nowadays, like you said, if even Paul said we were gone for 6 months and they thought we were done with Pepper. I mean, now 6 months and it's nothing. So, you said, so the length of time nowadays, you're right. But back then, you're gone 3-4 years, and people say, "Where are you're done."
Yeah. So when John left after, that's why I was reading the Pete Hamill interview just before the show, because I wanted to see when it came out, which was June of '75. I wanted to see what he was talking about, and he wasn't saying, "Oh, I'm going to take care of the kid when he's born." He's preparing for his next album, really. And if you think about, much of '75 for John, he was doing things. Walls and Bridges had just come out. Then Rock and Roll album came out. Then he had to take care of the lawsuit with Morris Levy, or Levy, however you say his name. Then he did a couple of live appearances on the Sir Lou Grade special, and then he got back with Yoko. He leaves May to go back to Yoko. So there was a lot of things in his life for that year. It wasn't a quiet year if you think about it.
Yeah.
But if you think about it, one thing that John said that I think people are. It took me a while to understand this myself. When John said that he didn't write during those years, to me, John didn't consider that finished. And if he didn't finish it, he didn't consider it something that he could then talk about. And if you think about, think about how many songs got rewritten for Double Fantasy that were already written, so to speak, at least melody wise, or
many.
Yeah, or he combined
Double Fantasy and Milk and Honey.
Right. Yeah. So Double Fantasy, he comes back. John, of course, records it very fast because that's the way he records things. And he did, and partly because he got murdered, so we can't say how much more press he would have done. But the fact that he did Playboy instead of maybe Rolling Stone was a tell sign.
Not to be. No, I was going to say not to be absolutely horrible, and I don't mean this with any disrespect, but John's murder was talk about quote press. I mean, we look at Double Fantasy as an artistic comeback. We look at it as a commercial comeback. But we obviously we love the man, we love the music, but you have to question how much of the posthumous sales were partly because it was posthumous.
Sure.
Had John lived, we still would be looking at Double Fantasy as a comeback. But I always think about the idea that the next record might have been the wow, holy crap, Lennon's
Tony,
though? We just don't know. But
to your point, which is a good one. Obviously, a lot of the press was, the murder, and not that I want to put this in my top two of what I'm going to say about the comebacks, but you know what? I hate to say it, and it sounds morbid, and please forgive me, but even the murder was sort of a comeback as John the Saint. John the Saint, I know it sounds horrible.
But also to taking that to the positive, the whole John the Saint thing, I think that was cumulative. I think that happened.
Yes.
That didn't happen right. I don't think that happened right at John's murder. I think you always get but I just even recall when John died, there were, a lot of the talk about John was pretty holistic. They talked about, he could have been a bastard and he was this with his first kid, but the John the Saint thing evolved, I think, over the years. But I do think that when you talk about comebacks, it isn't sometimes what the artist does. It's the idea that, and we could look at this with the Beatles, of course, with, Bill Sargent offers them this much money, and Beatlemania, the play opens at the Winterland, and the Beatles didn't do anything and had a resurgence. Here.
Look at Kate Bush.
Oh my God!
As of this time, Kate Bush did nothing except license a song to a TV show. And she's the hottest thing going right now.
Yes.
She did nothing 35 years later.
Right. What's the name of that song again? Running Up a Hill or something?
Yeah, Running Up the Hill.
Yeah.
Yep. So, to your point, absolutely your point is totally valid just by that, because you know what? You're right. The Beatles did nothing. The Beatles didn't come back. The Beatles put out the red album, the blue album, and then the Beatlemania, and the Beatles were coming back because of what we did.
I was going to bring this up a little bit later since you guys brought it up. One of the things about John's murder, that what happened was it made an ending, whether natural or not, for the Beatles story, so to speak.
Yeah.
And I think some other Beatles might have been upset by that part of it. Obviously, they're upset that John got murdered, but the fact that, oh, John did everything and Paul just watched him and maybe took some notes.
Well, I want to get to that with my Paul.
Yeah, so I think that's what, and that was like a hangover for the 80s. The fact that John was murdered, and it sort of ate away at the other Beatles, maybe not physically or mentally, but just the whole story, about them together. And they're still solo artists, but even though they, had their, they went away a little bit. But that's what I think happened with John when he was murdered, that this whole story, and then you get the backlash, like the Clash saying, about the, phony Beatlemania. They're the next generation and they're the young bucks. Yeah, they have a right to say it, but it is being said, and it's from the Clash. It's not from the Damned, let's say, or some other lower level punk band from England.
Tony, what you said before though struck me when you said some of the sales for Double Fantasy were driven by his murder, posthumous. Absolutely, but he himself said he was going to tour in 81.
He did say that. So
I have a feeling, Tony, that, again, it's all speculation. So,
but that would have been massive.
Yeah, it would have been massive. And I think it would have helped the album go back up the charts. Just having John Lennon on stage, he could have farted. He hadn't been on stage since, let's face it, since Elton, and that was nothing. And One to One, which, listen, One to One was a sloppy concert, and it wasn't John at his best. If he had those touring, the musicians from the sessions and doing Beatles, which he said he was going to, and his Double Fantasy, I think Double Fantasy would have climbed on its own merit because of the promotion of the tour.
Definitely.
Definitely. And actually, I think Yoko would have been, accepted in a different way. Not being the widow.
Without a doubt.
But all of a sudden, here's Yoko on stage doing Walking on Thin Ice, in the middle of the new wave generation. And
with John cranking on guitar.
Right. Yep. And then you say, oh, look, Yoko's doing the B-52s. Oh, no, the B-52s are doing Yoko.
Yeah, there you go.
So I think, and John did a lot of publicity for Double Fantasy. I think he almost did too much in many ways for Playboy. Not that I'm happy he did it, but it was a big interview if you look back at it. There's a lot.
All of them were the RKO and
right.
He did, but if you really listen to all the interviews he did, and he did plenty those few days.
Yeah,
they're all different.
Yes.
He doesn't really say the same thing in any of them, which is, I can listen to all of them because he just is so on a different level in his life. And he's just, he's not the angry young guy talking to Jan Wenner. He's not, he's just a very thoughtful, he praises the other guys. It's not like he's vengeful at all. He's just on a different level of his own
acceptance.
Yeah. And I think that, that's amazing.
So do you look at just, and I raise this, then I'll jump back to what we're talking about comeback and stuff. But so do you look at the comeback, quote unquote, as being Double Fantasy, or do you look at the comeback as being that week in 1980? Because the interviews were a comeback. The Playboy, or had John lived, I'm saying, the interviews were a comeback. The Playboy article was a comeback because it wasn't just John Lennon, the musician, putting out a record.
Yeah.
It was John Lennon, the guy who had been, they knew he wasn't in hiding. People saw him around Central Park. They saw him in New York. He was around. But you got a dose of John Lennon, the guy who we always knew, who could talk, who could wield a story, who could entertain, who had an opinion, so it was kind of like John's,
but not a political
comeback
anymore. He said he was a phony radical.
He did have some politics. He didn't.
Yes.
He didn't focus on it the way he did in 72.
It was a different time.
Yeah.
But if you think about it, in the politics of it, of 1980, you got to remember Ronald Reagan had just been elected. He's about to be put in as president in January of 81. And a lot of people like, oh my God, the conservative Republican, he's going to destroy the liberal thought process of our country.
Agenda.
And here's John Lennon, who in the earlier part of the decade was writing songs. Some of them were really good, and then you get some of them sometime in New York City. So he's writing songs and he's commenting, give peace a chance. War is over if you want it. Those are instant calm is going to get you. These are all important songs. And, not all the artists in the beginning of the 80s were at that point where he was in the 70s. And since he's coming back, he's sort of like, well, some people are hoping that, okay, maybe we go back to that time or something. And it was also passing at the same time. We, of course, don't know that when it's happening.
Well, Tony, to your point, though, again, is the comeback his trip to Bermuda?
Sure.
I mean, 25.
That's part of it. That's part of it.
Well, yeah, but you don't have the comeback unless he goes on that trip.
It's a reawakening.
Correct.
Yeah.
A reawakening for John, but which leads to the comeback for us.
Definitely.
Yeah. Well,
because without that trip to Bermuda, he's happy. He's singing. He's on the sea. He's with Sean. He's calling Yoko all the time. I mean, 25 songs, which leads to Milk and Honey and Double Fantasy, and other stuff. We forget also that, we wouldn't have the Beatles come back with Real Love and Free as a Bird if he wasn't working on stuff while he was retired.
Right. No, that's true.
We forget. So, is Free as a Bird and Real Love a comeback for John Lennon?
That's interesting. Sure.
I mean, John Lennon really was in the spotlight with
I sort of had that in the middle of my little Beatle thing at the end I was going to bring up, but that's a good point because they did start out as demo form in that time, 79, 80. So
wow.
That's a very good point. He went down to Bermuda with a tape machine and a guitar. So, he obviously was going to be writing. So that's part of it. And I'm not sure if that's where it starts, but I think it's the beginning, I would say.
Like Tony said, it reawoken.
Yeah. Well, but he also knew that him and Yoko were going to make a record eventually. They were much closer to it than say 1979.
Yeah, but I don't think he knew that until he went to Bermuda and they started writing and she was writing on the other end.
The back and forth.
Answering to him, right. Yeah. I think then they knew, wow, now I think we can have a record together. Because, John could have easily said, Yoko, I need to come back as me, not John and Yoko.
Yeah, well.
He could have. No, he could have. And you know what? Based on the fourth disc of the Lennon Anthology CD, it would have been a hell of an album.
And you know what? Based on what Ken Womack, wrote in his book about, John's last days and stuff, Yoko in a different mindset, Yoko would have been okay with letting John do. If John had said, Mother, this is what I really need to do, it sounded like Yoko really just wanted him to just be happy and do, and have the success and have the, so maybe that would have if that was what John had wanted to do. But going to comebacks and stuff like that, the thing about John is comebacks for John, I think there's such a psychological aspect to comebacks that I think, we're focusing on, okay, Double Fantasy is the comeback, but for John, and I know, Rob, you're saying there needed to be a certain sort of allotment of time that he elapsed, but if you think about it, John making Plastic Ono Band, and then imagine having now come off of heroin, come off of the Unfinished Music records, coming off of kind of having to find his center again to really make music, not that he didn't do a couple of great singles in there too, obviously, but
right.
To be focused enough to do both, Plastic Ono Band in 1 year, Imagine a year later. And then I think you get another lost period there. I'm not talking lost weekend crap. I'm talking like lost just sort of, sometime in New York City gets held up, and you get this sort of diversion that was the one-to-one concert, and then you get Mind Games. Another comeback from an artistic, musical, look, I can write great 3-minute pop songs.
Yeah, but I think purposely it was a different album. It seemed like it was just more like Mind Games to me is sort of a continuation of I Got to Do Something, where I thought Walls and Bridges was much better thought out for John, because first of all, he sat down with his band and rehearsed them and thank God recorded them, because personally, some of those rehearsals sound better than the finished stuff because they're so relaxed. Yeah. And John isn't trying as hard. And then he says, Walls and Bridges. Okay, I'm going to do the pop thing. Listen to this record. Listen to this ad. One of the great advertising things, and John loved advertising, was to listen to the thing. And I just found out that there was a full page ad in Radio and Records that said, listen to this ad, which I never saw before.
Yeah.
And anyway, but Walls and Bridges, think about it. He goes on KHJ in Los Angeles as a disc jockey. He sees Tom Donahue in San Francisco. He sees Dennis Elsis in New York. He purposely is selling Walls and Bridges, which he hadn't done in a while. Then he ends up on stage with Elton John on Thanksgiving of 74, which was a big thing. Now, mind you, it's before, social media and everything, but that was a big deal for John Lennon in 1974 to be on stage.
So let me ask you a question. Sounds so weird to say, is the Lost Weekend John's comeback?
Yes, in many ways.
How funny is that?
Yeah, in a way.
Because think about I hate to say it. He produced Harry Nilsson.
Yeah, he did everything.
He first of all, one thing he did with Harry Nilsson, and then this little tangent, he learned how to produce another artist that wasn't him. And I think that affected Walls and Bridges, why it was so much better as a production. Yeah, Too Many Cooks with Mick Jagger. He works with David Bowie. He works with Elton John. He was that the Lost Weekend was not lost.
No, absolutely not.
Yeah,
absolutely not.
The one thing I wanted to bring up too, Tony, you mentioned Ken Womack's book, and I have to bring this up because I really feel strongly after reading that book, although it was in May's book as well, I think Paul McCartney influenced John Lennon's comeback in 80. When he heard Coming Up and he said, F a pig, it's Paul.
Sure.
And he said, I was energized, not only because it was Paul, because, he said he wasn't really caring about what the others were doing. They were putting out so much stuff. He couldn't keep up with them at all. All three Beatles were putting out stuff much more than John. He said, but when he heard Coming Up, he said, you know what? Just like Warren Beatty told him when he sees a good movie, he wants to make a good movie. And he said the same thing with the record. He said, when I hear a good record, I want to make it. I want to make that record. And he said, when I heard Paul's freak out version of Coming Up, not the live one, he said, I was re-energized. And I think that led, that was early in 80. I think that led to, or early in 79, rather, sorry. I think that led to, him really being invigorated for the album.
It sets his mind up to say, well, maybe it's time to come back.
Yep.
Look, Paul's doing what he's doing. Maybe I could be as creative as that, because as he once said, there's only so many chords you can play and only so many notes you can sing.
Isn't it?
Well, actually,
he
heard it in 80. I'm sorry. He heard it in early 80. Yeah.
But isn't it fascinating, though, when you think about it, that here is John making a comment about being so inspired by Coming Up, and no disrespect to the album, the album Double Fantasy, and then we get sort of just what would amount to kind of traditional rock and roll from John.
Yes.
Double Fantasy.
Yes.
And throwback stuff, doing starting over and what.
But his other half was doing freak out stuff like Coming Up.
So, what did that do? Was it the B-52s and Paul doing coming up to have him go back and go, hey, Yoko, we're ready for, I mean, isn't it wild that
Walking
Paul
on
doing
thin ice
the
is
freaky
very
stuff?
freak out.
It's very freak out. It's very freak out. But John's own material didn't lend it. You'd never hear anything on Double Fantasy or maybe Forgive Me My Little Flower Princess because of the quirkiness of it. But well, it's
I
quirky.
like it, though.
I do too. It's quirky.
Listen, but I think I think he wasn't only talking about the freak out. He said he heard the freak out version of Coming Up. He said, but it was a really good infectious record. That's what he meant. So and listen.
Sure.
No matter what I don't know why people put down Double Fantasy the way they do, because songs like Cleanup Time and I'm Losing
Great songs
are
songs.
amazing and very infectious.
Absolutely.
And even when you got to I'm Stepping Out, that's infectious.
Stepping Out's very infectious.
So, he did. I think he got energized by hearing his old mate do a great record.
Yeah, that's part of it. And I think he wanted to come back. And I think, think about the version of I'm Losing You with Rick Nielsen and Bunny Carlos. Now, that maybe should have been on the record. It doesn't fit sound-wise, sonic-wise, but the version, finally came out. And it's, imagine the whole album sounding like that.
But he was willing to take a chance.
Yes, yeah.
And he stepped outside the box with two members of Cheap Trick.
Yeah.
And, I mean, did he hit a home run? It depends on your opinion.
I happen to like both versions, so I can't complain.
Absolutely. But a good song is a good song.
Yeah, I think going back to Walls and Bridges, he purposely was out there selling the record, which he hadn't done in a while. But he was also selling it without Yoko there. This was one of the only times he really did interviews without her. So it was a different side of John. The Dennis Ellis interview is still one of the great interviews he's ever done. Dennis and John.
Can I pose a horrible question at this point?
Sure.
No, seriously. I mean, just did John's death contribute to a degree to awareness of the others? Did let's think about it. Would all those years ago? Wasn't that a comeback single for George Harrison?
Yes.
But that was a different song because it was almost like an expected song. One of the Beatles had to do a tribute to the
Granted, but where I'm
Paul
going
did Here Today, and he didn't put it out as a single.
Right. Paul did Here Today.
Right.
But you know what though? When Tug of War was coming out, we knew that there was a tribute to his fallen friend John on it.
Right.
So, even when Stop and Smell the Roses came out, there was the whole, the album was supposed to be called Can't Fight Lightning, and it was going to have John on it, and John would have written the title song, and blah, blah, blah. So, and granted that it didn't help push a Ringo record into, but it's interesting that John's death also set up some degree of, quote, comebacks for the others, too.
Yes, but you know what? I don't think they took advantage.
Absolutely not. No,
right. I know what you mean. I think the record company took advantage. All those years ago, they did a tribute video of all Beatles. It didn't have to be that way.
But the song
that wasn't George's intention to have a video of all Beatles, and he even said he hated the video.
And that's also, all those years ago,
I'm thinking when we was Fab. I'm really sorry.
Well, all those years ago also had different lyrics for Ringo at one point. So
right,
yeah.
And he could have listened. I've said it before, and I think he should have. But now that we're talking, it would have been taking advantage. He could have easily told the world, "Hey, Ringo and Paul are on here. Put a picture sleeve of the three of them, and it would have gone number one for 10 weeks."
The first Beatles record. Yeah,
right. No, but he could have done that.
And also make Paul again. Paul's vocals should be a little bit higher. If you're going to have him play on or sing on the background on your track.
That's why he didn't want to take advantage. He didn't want to say,
he is there.
I'm putting this out as taking advantage of John's murder because I want a number one record.
Right. Okay. Good point. A good point about John. There's always a lot about John. And the last one on our list, I figured the guy who has it continues. He really hasn't stopped in 50, 60 years. Except for a couple of times, and it was actually short times. It wasn't really long period of times, and that's Paul McCartney. So I'll let Paul. I'll let Mitchell start off with this one because
man,
I think each one of us has something different about where
I think we do.
Yeah.
let me give you two, because I know where you're all going to do the third one. I think we just talked about it. I think the death of John Lennon reinvigorated Paul because, like you said before, I think, Paul felt like he had to keep the mantle of the Beatles going. And I think, Tug of War came out, even though it was being written. But what a great album. I think I think, Tug of War to me was a comeback album because it was his masterpiece. But even forgetting about the death of John Lennon, I think the Beatles anthology was a big influence in the comeback of Paul McCartney because...
Damn you son of a...
Really? You had that?
I have that's part of my... Because that's part of something else, but you're jumping ahead, but go with it.
Sorry,
I know where you're going. I know where you're going.
I know where you're going backwards, but I really have it number one. I have the Beatles anthology because I think it made him think of how he recorded and he did Flaming Pie, which number one, and he did a ton of press for that.
Yep.
Look, the album prior to it, which I know people are going to say is a comeback, listening to it over the years, it's a fine album.
What? Which one? Which one you're talking
Flowers.
about? Oh, Flowers in the Dirt. Okay.
Yeah.
It's very sporadic. I mean, let's face it. What album did he have between Flowers and
Press to Play. Press to Play was
no, not between this and Flaming Pie.
Off the Ground.
Yeah, which was good. Yeah. But I think comeback. Paul McCartney was everywhere with Flaming Pie.
Yes, he was.
So I think that one is a big impetus in having Paul do the comeback of Paul McCartney as an artist, as a major artist. I mean, look, he had amazing stuff prior to that, but I think Flaming Pie put him back to the status of who he was because people had just seen the Beatles for 6 hours,
right?
And then now you get this. Let's face it. There's a lot of it that's very Beatle-y, but I think it's a fine album in general, and he did so much press for it, which he didn't really do for some of the other stuff. He did some press, but he didn't do a lot. But I think the Beatles anthology really was a big one as a comeback for Paul McCartney.
I agree because I think what the anthology did, since he actually got to listen to the tapes, he'd go visit and say, hey, let's hear a tape today. Oh, my God, we did 3 songs in 4 hours today. Well, why am I taking 4 weeks or 5 weeks to do half a song?
Right.
And that's what, to me, Flowers in the Dirt is. I like Flowers in the Dirt, but there's a lot of producers on it. A song like We Got Married is way too long. That's like the perfect 3-minute Paul McCartney song that goes on for another minute and a half. There you
go with Motor of Love. I mean, come on.
Motor of Love's another one like that. But at the same time, Flowers in the Dirt came out when he toured. So if he doesn't tour, maybe he doesn't get the good press. Maybe he doesn't get the sales. My Brave Face is a great song. You Want Her Too is a really good song. I wish that was a single. So there are good
My
songs.
Brave Face it went top 40.
Yeah, it did. And it had a great video too.
Yes, but it, again, a Beatle video.
Yes, that's true. But at the time, what was being sold at the auctions? Beatles stuff.
Right. Right.
So that was part of it. But to me, if he hadn't announced that tour, I'm not sure that album gets the respect that it got. And I also wish that he had toured with Press to Play, because Press to Play, well, he was trying so hard to be accepted in the musical soundtrack of that era, which is
difficult album to tour, though.
Correct.
What?
Difficult album to tour.
Well, yeah,
because of the production.
That's true. It's very much a Phil Collins, Hugh Padgham sounding thing.
You bet.
But if you remember, right around the time of Press to Play, maybe 87, with All the Best, he was everywhere on TV.
Yeah, but mostly he was mostly in Great Britain. He released Once Upon a Long Ago,
right?
Which was a hit there,
right? Great Britain,
right.
But he did do the only live version of Only Love Remains.
But Only Love Remains was probably like the one song that you could pull off fairly. I mean,
right.
Stranglehold, maybe if you have the right band and stuff like that. But A lot of stuff on that record, Footprints, Talk More Talk, Pretty Little Head.
Right.
Those were album cuts. Those are produced.
You can do angry,
cuts.
but you're going to do however absurd.
Yeah, right. You can't. But if I mean, are you? I'm sorry, Mitch. Am I going to?
No, I'm done.
I have a couple, and I have a couple. I'm going to go out of chronological order, but
sure.
But you guys alluded to a couple of different things and song titles, and I'm going to say the two words for me that was such a huge comeback for Paul McCartney as a creative force, Elvis Costello. I mean, Elvis Costello was Paul's comeback for me, because those songs that those two put together, that was just the beginning of a renaissance for McCartney as a writer. And I think that his work with Elvis, I think, contributed to what he did thereafter, to today. I think it continues. I just think that some of the angles that Paul's material took when working with Elvis, I think contributed to a little bit more of where his head went as a songwriter after that. And I think the other thing is too, I can't help it. I guess you can't always help but feel, but like your favorite record is a quote comeback record. But Memory Almost Full, I thought was a comeback to a level, to a height, as with McCartney as a songwriter and a creator. And then going backwards too, and I think another comeback moment was that MTV Up Close special.
Oh yeah.
The Ed Sullivan Theater event, debuting new material, playing with a hot ass band. That was another, like, this is what McCartney looks like live now, and this is this version of McCartney with a band.
Well, even a year prior, Unplugged.
Unplugged, yeah, but Unplugged was Unplugged.
Yeah, Unplugged was different because it hadn't become Unplugged yet, really.
Right. Right.
It became Unplugged with Paul and then a couple other people.
Yeah.
But the Up Close thing, you're right, Tony, because not everyone saw Paul live.
No, absolutely not.
And you see this concert on MTV, and it's like, wow, he's sounding great.
Yeah. And it was the first time he went really back to like fixing a hole and stuff like that. I mean,
and played with a hot band. Yeah. And then the last one, going all the way back, and this is something that Winnie and I were talking about, is that there's definitely something of a comeback, and she noticed it kind of in the timeline. But for Paul as a creative spirit, we were talking about linking back up with George Martin in 1972 and doing Live and Let Die.
73.
73. Well, it was recorded October 72.
Was it?
Yeah.
Okay, I'm sorry.
But it's okay. Released in 73. But linking up with George Martin and doing that again. There was something. I mean, obviously, like I love Ram and don't really love Wildlife, and Red Rose Speedway was still finding his way back, and you get that ripping guitar solo in something like My Love, which is something of an accident. But there's something about Live and Let Die and working with Dad again and being in that environment again and the orchestra and a straight ahead rock out rock and roll song. And again, we were just talking about it, like, in perspective. And I just think that there's a comeback there too, that possibly then, again, it's the idea of when you have that artistic comeback, do you have the power to carry that with you to what you do next? And then after that was Band on the Run, was like, stripping it down, putting together a rock and roll record with a lot of different things going on.
Red Rose Speedway was first, and then...
Well, Red Rose Speedway was in there, but I just feel like what happened with Live and Let Die got brought into a kind of change. You got that, like I said, that ripping guitar solo in My Love.
Right, yeah.
You got another Sweet, so maybe it was that work with George Martin, the real strong producer, got him back to wanting to like make another real record again. It was kind of almost like when he went back to George Martin and they did Abbey Road.
Yeah.
Working with Dad again, bring him into creating a new,
Well, when you want to prove something to someone you were looking for acceptance from, and that would be the case with Paul and George Martin in many cases.
Yeah.
You come up with Live and Let Die and not, Power Cut, So,
I like that medley. Come on.
Oh God, come on, man.
I'm sorry. All 11 minutes of it, I want.
I want it cut down, but it's not, the songs aren't totally bad. They just shouldn't have been that long for 4 songs. I just want to read something, part of the lyric for Move Over Busker, because I think Paul in 1986 still wants to be part of the game. The line goes, well, I've been waiting, but I'm impatient. No one can hold me back. I want to stay in the action, but I won't get it. My great illusion will vanish anyhow if I don't grab it now. And to me, that's, you don't see sometimes a lot of personal stuff in Paul's lyrics that specific.
If you had, as much as I like that album, if you had read me that lyric,
would not have known it,
independent of everything else,
right.
I would have been like, what the hell song is that from?
Right.
Yeah,
which is pretty cool, actually.
Yeah. So, to me, I think he wanted, because think about it, he just made Give My Regards to Broad Street, which, it had a great ballad, but the movie is, not a good movie. It's not
amazing, an amazing, what do you call it? Visual melatonin.
Yeah, well, if you look at his videos, it's okay. But if you look at it as like Ferry Across the Mersey,
I didn't know where you were going to go with that. It's like an amazing visual melatonin.
But getting back just about Paul and, Flaming Pie, since Flaming Pie, he has been on a roll except for Baby Driving Rain. If you think about it, Chaos and Creation in the Backyard. But these are just sort of a continuation of what he's been doing. Flaming Pie, I don't want to say it was a wake-up call, but he just had to have a good album coming out of the anthology, and
I agree with that.
That's part of it. I mean, the anthology was the biggest selling thing in 1996.
Can I do something that Tony did before, where you did?
You speak German?
The alternate universe, Tony, you did it before.
Go ahead, sure.
I really, and I firmly believe this, and it's total speculation again, so we'll never know. I firmly believe, and I put it on our page to discuss it, I really believe that had Paul gotten a band together and done a 5 or 6 song set at Live Aid, he would have been the best thing there. He would have outdone Queen, because Paul was still in great voice in 85.
Yeah.
And if he would have, he had Let It Be at the end, which unfortunately got marred by technical difficulties. But if he would have actually, I know he said he was nervous and this and that, he didn't have a band together. But if he would have gotten a band together, all the other bands that played other than Queen, who were amazing, let's face it, Led Zeppelin sucked, the Stones, everybody was mediocre at best. If Paul McCartney would have had a good band and would have done Paul songs for 5 or 6 songs with Beatles and Paul, I think that would have been the comeback that we would be all talking about right now.
Wow. But, you got to remember, if you remember, there was rumors that that George and Ringo were going to show up with Julian, poor Julian. And maybe that's why it didn't happen. I don't know. That would be different. Was the timing there to bring back the Beatles, so to speak? In 1985. One of the things I look back at the 80s is the Beatles were sort of being pushed aside. Sergeant Pepper have
to bring back the Beatles. That's my point.
No, but
he could have done. I Saw Her Standing There as the only Beatles song,
right?
And then done Band on the Run or whatever he would have done. He had the hits to do a 5-song set.
Well, he did the next year at the Prince's Trust.
Come on.
He did the Prince's Trust the next year, so maybe
right.
Being more British and less seen by people, maybe he felt more comfortable. That's a good point.
Do you think that the idea was that Geldof was saving Paul McCartney for the big finish? You know, it was "Let It Be," man. Just this is what it's all about. And
Yeah,
that's
but
gonna
he
be.
could have.
And then the mic failed, and then blah blah blah.
Listen,
blah, blah.
he could have been the last act on No Matter What and done 5 songs.
Yeah,
and he would have blown people the hell away.
Well,
Again, you know,
he hadn't really played in a while.
I understand all that. I'm just saying, you know, we never really think about it. He did Let It Be, and he sounded great on Let It Be, which you could hear. Sounded great, and everybody went nuts. But can you just imagine all that crowd just doing like they did with Radio Gaga? You know, with the clapping in the hands and everything for Queen. Imagine everybody doing the woos of I Saw Her Standing There.
Well, it's not just that, but it's also thanks to the changes in technology and stuff. You know, could you have imagined? And here's what's a little weird about Paul, and I never really thought of this, Mitch, until you just brought this idea up. But you know, here you got like Phil Collins. I think back my mom on one of the songs on that show. I mean, like Phil Collins playing with, you know, I mean, I'm kidding. He played with a few different people, and you've got all these artists who Paul's familiar with. You've got Clapton on the bill in America doing, you know, Clapton could have hopped on a Concorde and gone back too, but could you? Never mind, I Saw Her Standing There. Could you have seen Paul coming out and ripping into Sgt. Pepper's Lonely Hearts Club Band?
He did it at the G8 thing or whatever.
Yeah,
the G8 thing.
But could you have seen, like, you know, and that's before that was even like a remote idea for us that Paul would do something like that. But you know, here in America, I was at the show and Clapton coming out and pulling out White Room was just, oh my God, like the place went ballistic.
Correct.
Could you imagine the nanny nanny poo poo that Paul would have pulled off on, you know, Eric doing White Room by just walking out and having even having Clapton on guitar, or, you know, Jeff Beck or anybody who, you know, Paul could have, you know, even said to Geldof, you know what, man, I don't have a band. And Geldof said, really, Paul, that's your problem?
Yeah.
Give me 20 minutes.
Yeah, but also you got to remember,
the na-nas of Hey Jude would have been
of course
reverberating around Wembley.
Oh yeah,
but I think also if you bring up Live Aid just as a sidebar thing,
I have to.
I know it's a good point, but a lot of the acts who played in Great Britain were more of a new wave. They were next generation, many of them. Where in the States they were more of a classic rock sounding.
The Hooters were classic rock.
Well, the Who, okay. Well, okay. But the Who were in
the Hooters. The Hooters.
Oh, the Hooters. I thought you said the
Hooters. Yeah, they were in Philly. They're not classic rock.
The Who were where, Tony? You would know. They were in
London? The Who were in Great Britain.
Okay, yeah. I'm sorry, but
no, it's okay.
For some reason, I thought the Who were in Philly, but maybe.
Yeah, I thought so.
I got to tell you something, guys. All I know is halfway through, I had wicked heat stroke, and it was the worst day of my life.
I know. I love the story.
So I hated that show. I don't even want to think anything about it. But
Tony was every band that came out. He was like, "Who?"
Yeah, exactly. Right, exactly. I was apparently babbling about a puppy that I didn't have. So it was not my favorite day.
They didn't shoot water cannons at you guys in the crowd?
Oh, yeah, they shot the water cannons. They ended 4 rows in front of me. I ended up being dragged into a stall in a men's room where someone had pulled out a plastic pipe and set up a shower. It was very,
I thought you were going to say you were pulled into a stall by
George Michael.
Well,
oh, man.
One more thing to add to this.
We had to degrade somewhere, I guess.
One more thing to add, and Mitch had started to talk about this. One thing that I think fixed the Beatles in history, not just in the presentation, but I think when the Beatles anthology came out and they had 2 new songs, even though based on demos of John's, there was a gathering of critics and other people that started to say, you know what, these guys, the Beatles, you know what, maybe they did change the world a couple of minutes out of our lives.
I really disagree with you.
What?
I have to disagree with you.
Really? Okay.
Yes, because for me, the Beatles' big comeback was 1994 BBC. When the BBC album was put out, that blew people away.
Well, I kind of agree with that because I thought the Great Dane box set was, still one of the great releases of all time.
Well, forget about that. It sold. BBC sold 4 million copies, and that's more than Anthology 2 or 3.
Anthology. No, the anthology sold 25 million.
But Anthology 3 sold like 3 million.
Well, that's
so it was. But I'm just saying, BBC Live at the BBC was, to me, the big Beatle comeback, because you really got amazing stuff.
I got to meet you. I got to kind of meet you guys in the middle, because I know, because where I'm going is that Anthology 1 was massive.
Right.
What did Anthology 1 and the 2 BBC boxes have in common?
some bad sound quality.
They covered the same time period. It was the young Beatles. It was the it was the savage young Beatles.
Right.
What the world needed, wanted, was going after was what was appealing to people was the young Beatles. So that's why Anthology 1 sold a gazillion copies and BBC 1 and 2 sold a gazillion copies, because that was what that was what reinvigorated the world for the young Beatles.
Well, it set up the anthology. Whether it was planned or not, I'm not sure, because the Live at the BBC was kind of a quiet release compared to the anthology, where
absolutely,
one of the things about the anthology, you see, current interviews with George Harrison, and here's Ringo Starr. Oh, there's Paul McCartney talking about the Beatles. Oh my God, the three of them are in the same room, and oh my God, they're playing in the same track.
Do you think if they'd released the 24-minute ukulele solo that the three of them did, would it have actually? Carnival of Uke, wasn't that the? Sorry,
that's something else, but I'll go with that.
Is that Fred Gwynn, Carnival of Ute?
Ute, yeah.
I distinctly heard him say Ute.
But the other thing about the anthology, and not just because of all the great music that was released, and I had no problems with some of the so-called outfakes that George Martin put together. I had no problems with that. But one thing that other bands have done since is they've told their own story. They put out either a video or they put out a book, and the Beatles had CDs, book, a TV show, and videos.
Let's face it, Rob.
Let's
face it. The real comeback for the Beatles, 2000. The Beatles won. That's it.
Well,
wow.
See, that's a continuation, though. Good point, because
Rob,
because that new generation comes along with them. That too.
Yeah, it was on TV. It was they had commercials. It sold 30 million worldwide, and every other band put out their one album.
Yeah, well, not everyone could do it. That's Mariah Carey can maybe do a number one, or
they
Michael
did it
Jackson.
With the Supremes. They did it with Elvis. They did it with Michael Jackson. They did the Bee Gees.
Yep.
Everybody had their quote one album.
That's true. That's sort
the
of
Beatles led the way again, and that put the Beatles into the heads of every young kid in the 2000s, and really sparked a big comeback. But that's a story for another day.
That's another story.
That's another episode.
That's another episode.
It really is.
But the anthology, it's just a setup. The fact that they're together. Oh, they don't hate each other. Oh, look, George is actually smiling when Paul's in the room. So to me, it's a combination. If you think about Live at the BBC, the anthology, and then Beatles one, it's a nice connection.
Their comebacks.
Yeah, we don't count the Yellow Submarine song track, even though I love it.
No.
But that wasn't a comeback, so to speak.
Yes. No. 62 to 66, 67, 70, the Beatlemania, rock and roll music, the Bill Sargent offer.
The Beatles that's just part of something else.
The Saturday Night Live episode,
Right, the Beatles as a group had so many comebacks. Where they just sat back and went, okay, I'll collect the money.
Please. Anyway.
Exactly.
All right.
Okay, well, that just about does it. I can't think of any other things to add, unless you guys have anything.
No, we're good.
Okay. That's been our episode on Beatle and solo Beatle comebacks. I've been your moderator for today's show. My name is Rob Leonard. And joining me, of course, has been Mitch Axelrod.
Take care, folks.
And Tony Traguardo.
Thanks for listening, everybody.
And we'll see you next time. Take care and bye-bye.
Fab 4 Free For All was edited and produced by Tony Traguardo at Word of Mouth Studios in Westbury, New York.
The opening and closing theme is My Dolly by the band The Badge, featuring longtime listener Jeff Slate, available on its debut album Digital Retro and recent Best Of compilation, as well as from the Fab 4 Free For All website.
Thanks for listening to Fab 4 Free For All.